Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Green Deal press event. I'm your host, Paul Hughes, the head of communications at Tado, and we put this event together to shed light on just how important buildings are to the Green Deal and for Europe's plan to go carbon neutral by 2050. So on to our agenda today. We've brought together leaders from the fields of technology, policy, and economics who approach the same topic through different lenses. And without further ado, let me introduce you to our first speaker, Jan Rosenow, who's a special advisor to the UK's House of Commons, an honorary research associate at Oxford University's Environmental Change Institute, and a director at the Regulatory Assistant Project. Over to you, Jan.
Thanks, Paul, and good morning, everyone. It's great to talk about this really exciting topic, a very timely event. Thanks for organizing it, to Paul and his team. So I'm going to talk to you for 8 minutes about the European Green Deal and buildings. First slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when I look at heating, I look at it from a very personal perspective. You know, heating and buildings is a deeply personal issue, and that's why it's also quite complicated and why we haven't done enough over the last decades. You know, we've done a lot in the power sector, but not so much on heating. This is my own house in Oxford, and you can see over the last 140 years how it has changed. You know, with a coal fire on the left-hand side, a gas boiler, and now a heat pump and energy efficiency. This is the kind of transformation we're going to see across the European building stock over the next 20, 30 years. Next slide, please. I'm going to do 3 things in my presentation. I want to talk first about the Green Deal and what it is, very briefly. I then want to talk about the key issues around buildings and why they are so important for meeting climate neutrality. And then finally, just to point to some of the solutions. I know the other speakers will spend their presentations on very specific solutions, so I'm just going to touch on them and leave the floor to the other speakers to explain a bit more clearly what the solutions are going to be. So on the first issue, what is the Green Deal? Well, really, in a nutshell, it's about meeting net zero emissions goals by 2050. So the Green Deal at European Union level is a raft of legislation announced by Ursula von der Leyen here in 2019, how to meet climate neutrality by 2050. Next slide, please. So we have a clear goal, and I think about this very much as if you have to climb a very large mountain, very high mountain, and you don't know exactly how you're going to get to the top. We know we need to get there, but we don't know exactly what the road is going to look like. We don't know what's going to be around the next bend of the road. And different countries have taken different approaches. I know there are many people here from the UK, for example, and the UK just launched its 10-point plan. You know, other countries take a different route, but we all have to get to the top of the mountain, which is climate neutrality by 2050. Next slide, please. So what is the European Union doing on the Green Deal? Well, I don't expect you to read this slide. It's a snapshot from a recent communications document from the Commission, but it just shows you that there's a lot of different initiatives. So the Green Deal is not just one single policy. There are at least 15, 20 different initiatives under that umbrella. And just looking at one of them, which is the buildings part, the red box here, I can show you, how important it is to look at buildings in more detail and what the Commission is planning to do about emissions from buildings. Next slide, please. So why do buildings matter? Why do we talk about buildings today? Next slide, please. Well, the answer is that heating our buildings is extremely carbon intensive. You know, just to put this into perspective, just heating our homes in Europe emits more carbon emissions than all the coal power plants still in operation in Europe. That's not even looking at the buildings we have in the service sector or in industry, just our homes. So we have to decarbonize heating to meet climate neutrality goals by 2050. There's no way around this. The main reason for this high number of emissions is really just because we have a large share of fossil heating still being used, about 75%. Next slide, please. What does this mean concretely for the European building stock? And here's some numbers that I've extracted from a very much impenetrable document from the Commission, the impact assessment, a very long and very technical document. But what the document shows is that we have to reduce emissions from buildings by about 60% at least by 2030 compared to 2015. I mean, that's a huge endeavor to achieve, but that's what we need to do to meet climate neutrality goals. And second, we need to increase the number of energy savings per year by about 10 at the current rate. And then finally, by 2026, the Commission expects that 4.6% of all homes every year will have to switch to low carbon heating. So that's every year 4.6%. So a huge target in front of us. But the good news is we have solutions that can achieve that. And we cover some of that in the other presentations. I just wanted to highlight two particular aspects that I think will be important. Next slide, please. And these are announced partly through the renovation wave, which is one of the many initiatives under the Green Deal. It's another document. And here you see just how many components that has. I'm not going to have time to talk you through it, but the main issue that you would need to understand, I think, is that there's a whole range of initiatives under the renovation wave that all will lead to making that transition towards a climate neutral building stock. Two aspects what are important in this initiative. First one, next slide, please, is that it's all going to be about smart buildings. So increasingly, we will transition away from combusting fuels to electrification in buildings, and we will have smarter systems that allow us to monitor and manage our buildings much more closely and take advantage of buildings as batteries, as grid interactive buildings that can help us integrate renewables and help us balance the system. You know, the events in Texas last week are a very good example. Had the buildings been more efficient and had we had more efficient heating equipment, we could have avoided at least some of the impacts in Texas. Next slide, please. Another really important aspect, and that's my final slide before my conclusions, is regulation. A lot of this will require new legislation. It's not going to happen by simply relying on information and a bit more subsidy. And the Commission recognizes that. And national governments also recognize that having minimum standards for all buildings that are tightened over time is an initiative that is now getting traction across Europe. The UK government has already implemented something like that a long time ago for privately rented buildings, for example. Next slide, please. So my conclusions for this event are takeaway messages. Buildings really do matter for net zero and for meeting climate neutrality. You've seen the slide on coal power plants and emissions as a reminder. Efficiency and electrification will be critical in all of this. District heating is another important technology, but it's going to be about efficiency and electrification, at least in the next decade, that's for sure. Buildings can and should be grid interactive. You know, we have an opportunity there that we need to take advantage of. And finally, we will need regulation to achieve the scale of change required. Remember, you know, the slide with the 3 targets for 2030. It is inconceivable that we're going to meet any of that without having regulatory backstop in place that really gives the market that certainty that it requires. That's all I can say in the 8 minutes I've been given. I want to make sure we have enough time for the other speakers and for Q&A. Thanks for listening. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Jan. And I can see we've already got a question in the Q&A there. So just a reminder to everyone, please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentations. I'd like to introduce our next speaker now. This is Matthias Kersken, a research associate with the Fraunhofer Institute for Building Physics and an expert on how buildings retain and consume energy. Over to you, Matthias.
Hey, Paul, thanks for the introduction. First slide, please. I'll talk you briefly on the topic how buildings consume energy, retain it, and how that interacts with our current transformation in the electricity grid. Next slide, please. There are basically 2 main mechanisms how buildings lose heat from their room. One is through the envelope, meaning through the roof, exterior walls into the cellar, and by ventilation. So if we open the windows to get in new air. By the law of energy conservation, to keep up the room air temperature to a comfortable level, the heating system has to provide the same amount of heat as the building loses. I'll not dive into how efficiently heat is produced. I think the next speakers are excellently qualified to do that. I'll talk over how the loss of heat can be reduced in a building. There are basically 3 mechanisms that can achieve that. They're not correlated to each other, so you can implement one and not the others. The order I'll be showing here is arbitrary. Next slide, please. The first mechanism, which is probably the most common one, is insulating the building envelopes. This has a large impact, but also is quite costly. Next slide, please. The next mechanism is replacing the ventilation through window with a mechanical ventilation system with heat recovery. Earlier, these systems were very difficult to use in refurbishments because of all the required ductwork, but nowadays they are very efficient decentralized systems that require minimal installation effort. Next slide, please. The third mechanism is to reduce the driving force for the heat losses, the temperature difference between inside and outside. Since raising outside temperature is exactly what we want to avoid, we need to reduce inside temperature. But still, we want to be comfortable within our homes. So we can only reduce the temperature in rooms or in times when the building is not occupied. This comes with some restrictions because we have to heat up the buildings or rooms before we re-enter them, and we need occupancy information to be able to do that. Achievable savings go around 8 to 19%, which is good, not huge, but what points out here is the low to none investment that is necessary to achieve these savings. Next slide, please. The increasing amount of heat pumps and other electrical heating systems leads to a merge of the huge thermal energy market into the electrical energy market. First, that might sound like a huge problem, but we have to consider that efficient buildings lose very little heat and still have a high thermal mass. So we absolutely have no problem in modern efficient buildings to switch off the heating for several hours to avoid peak load hours in the grid. Also, there are concepts on the market partially even that allow to turn off the heating for days and multiple days. Next slide, please. So what we typically have, we have an overproduction, for example, around noon from PV production, and the morning and the evening. We might have higher loads in the building from heating and domestic hot water. So what we want to do, we don't want to fire fossil coal plants or build huge batteries for heating our buildings, not like building lithium batteries. What we want to do is shift those loads that we cannot cover by renewables to the part where we have overproduction, so where we are producing electricity that we cannot sell. So by shifting these loads to that times, or by dropping the loads, we can achieve a very good merge between the production and the consumption. And by so, we can see how the already mentioned huge consumption of buildings can contribute to the stability of grids, including a lot of renewable energies. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias. We'll now take a dive into technology and the three core measures that make a big energy efficiency impact in buildings. That is heat pumps, insulation, and smart controls. And first up will be Thomas Nowak, the Director General of the European Heat Pump Association. Over to you, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul, and thank you very much to Jan and Matthias, because you created a great background. We can look at my first slide. I will talk about heat pumps as a technology and what they can do for the Green Deal and for the energy transition. Can you show the first one then? Because then I would have some illustration. Otherwise, I can also just talk about it. We are in the era of having 5, 6, or 7 heat pumps in your building. You have heat pumps in white goods, you have heat pumps in your electric car, you have heat pumps in your fridge, and you have heat pumps in your heat pump system, as it was already shown. And the benefit of this is that we can make our life more comfortable by having these heat pumps, because they provide comfort to the end user building. And at the same time, they have some additional benefits that you would see on the second slide. And that's what we have called them here balancing technology. So it's a demand side load that we can integrate into the system. And my previous speaker talked about heat batteries, and that's what we actually see. We have done we have looked at statistics from our own data. So you can just go to the next one. Exactly here. So we have looked at statistics from our own data, and we can say that heat pumps have the potential to switch between 1 and 3 terawatt hours of electricity from peak to off-peak hours. And then we can see on the next slide that there's also an additional benefit, and that means that we have no emissions at the point of operation. And I think this health aspect, especially after the COVID pandemic, will actually become more important. I have talked to a planner yesterday who is doing schools, and all the new schools in Germany where I live, they will have ventilation systems and air cleaning. So this aspect of air quality is increasing. On the next slide, we will see that heat pumps are actually developing quite nicely. We have seen continuous growth for the last 8 years. We are now at 1.6 million units per year. And we have a stock of 14.8 million units. You have to put this into context. We have around 115 to 120 million building units in Europe. So we are somewhere above 10% at the moment. And that's when the Green Deal that we see on the next slide, Mr. Timmermans smiling at us, came into the discussion. And he said that the housing renovation plan, which is now called the renovation wave, will be the flagship of the European Green Deal. So Ursula von der Leyen, Green Deal, Timmermans, EU renovation plan. And then what does that mean? We have a document that we see on the next slide, and I made it very simple on you, just one sentence. The EU system integration strategy is based on another impact assessment, and it concludes that by 2030, we will have 4 times as many heat pumps as we have today. So somewhere between 48 and 57 million units, and that is huge because it means we have to grow this market by 19%. Industry can deliver that, but is the market ready to create the demand, and are we ready to provide these units in the required quality? The second thing, and that's on the next slide, then we have the renovation wave, and the renovation wave has many aspects that Jan has shown already, but one important point I wanted to single out here, and that is the aim to renovate the 35 million least performing buildings. And that's super important when it comes to heat pumps, because it means that those buildings where we would say today they are not fit for purpose, they move into the area of being available, being suitable for heat pump deployment. And here we have made a graph on the next slide where we say, okay, how many buildings can we put heat pumps in? New buildings, that's no problem. So you could actually say, if you don't build a new building as a passive house standard or with a heat pump, you're making a mistake by yourself. If you simply do some boiler exchange and some renovation, maybe a new radiator, maybe you make some new buildings and new windows in there, then we think that about 40% of these buildings are fit for purpose for a heat pump deployment with very little extra effort. And then there's about 40% where we say, well, there is more work necessary. And on the one hand, this block will be reduced by technology advancements. We have now heat pumps that can do 70, 75 degrees centigrade. So they are actually moving into areas that were beforehand considered non-applicable. And then, of course, we have this renovation wave that closes the gap from the bottom. So last, what do we need for that? Last slide then, please. We need to activate the end user demand. We see at the moment a lot of subsidies are paid for end users to encourage them to invest into heat pumps, but we think it would be better if the market framework would actually lead to using more efficient technology with renewable energy as something that the user wants. And we think that it needs some regulation changes. We need to look into energy taxation and a CO2 price. We need to look at a value for flexibility. And in order to make it simple for end users, we need these solutions that are one-stop shops and make it easy to trust for the end user that the solution they choose is a good solution. Thank you for your attention. I have one last slide on the association, but that is more for your information.
Thank you, Thomas. Now over to Yosr Melki, the Marketing Communications Director, Western Europe from Knauf Insulation. Over to you, Yosr.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for the great foundation on how heat transfer happens inside a building and the heating technologies. I'm going to talk you through the benefits of insulation and how energy efficiency is a pillar of both European Green Deal and renovation wave. Maybe one first word on Knauf Insulation. Third slide, please. So that's slide number 1. Knauf Insulation is a family-owned company with more than 40 years of experience, reaching a strong and steady financial performance with a turnover around 2 billion euros. It's part of Knauf Group, which is a 10 billion euro family-owned. I know this looks big, but that's thanks to some committed employees, more than more than 5,500 employees in Knauf Insulation. In Knauf Insulation, we focus on main 4 technologies. That's glass mineral wool, rock mineral wool, green solutions, and wood wool, all serving energy efficiency and insulation in general. Next slide, please. As explained by the previous presenters, there are many complementary solutions to make building energy efficient. And one of the very important factors is making the envelope of the building energy performant. It's not only to optimize other solutions such as control systems, but it also makes buildings safer and more comfortable while lowering the energy bills. Adequate levels of insulation can multiply the time by which a building temperature can remain comfortable after heating was switched off, and that's the battery logic. The evidence shows that deep and high quality renovations of buildings can drastically reduce the energy use and help energy systems become smart, flexible, and renewable. As Thomas said, if you are building a new house, it's just no sense to do it non-passive, but for old stock, that's very important to insulate and to insulate heavily. And I would even say going for deep renovation rather than small renovations. In Knauf Insulation, we provide different solutions for different building types because we provide the right solution for the right application. We can go to the next slide, please. And beyond energy efficiency, the products contribute also to the sustainability of buildings. Next slide. And here you can see what sustainable building means. It's a perfect balance between the economic part, and that's the energy bill, the environmental part, and the people part, keeping the place safe, healthy, and comfortable for the occupants of the building or the house. Next slide, please. As you all know, and you might heard, Europe has decided to lead the green wave, the Green Deal, and for sure other regions will follow. €1 trillion being allocated to the Green Deal over the next decade, 55% reduction by 2030, and carbon neutrality is the objective by 2050. The top line, the message is clear: go big and go buildings. We will have a renovation wave that has been discussed before, and it's not only about renovation, it's also about the need for a cleaner construction sector in general, and it's also carbon neutrality and circularity. Next slide, please. You might also have heard over the last few weeks or even months during the hearing of the upcoming Commission that Europe needs to step up its effort to decarbonize our economy by 2050. And you have heard a lot, I hope, about the need to focus on energy efficiency. We believe, as the Alliance, along with many other stakeholders, that we need to focus on energy efficiency first. And we were also, let's say, as industry, complementary in this sector, proud and happy that that was recognized and emphasized in the recent mission letters and hearings. Next slide, please. Yes, that's one. Sorry. Here, what you can see on the slide, that's the environmental payback of mineral wool insulation over building lifetime. And on the top of the slide, you can see the global insulation data. The size of the industry is a value of 41 billion euros. So that's a lot of employment also. And that's better than planting trees. Insulation contributes massively to the sustainable development. The energy consumption is still increasing, driven by space cooling also, not only heating, and appliances in developing economies like Brazil, Indonesia, Mexico, and so on. And only a third of the buildings only are covered by energy efficiency policies. Energy efficiency first means reducing the energy we need to power our buildings, industries, transport systems, and it means using this energy smartly and not wasting it. For example, insulating buildings properly means optimizing energy use in a smart way. It means installing heat recovery to avoid wasting energy, and in a nutshell, it means using less to leave the same and do more. Next slide, please. So renovating European building is a key component of the Green Deal and the renovation wave because buildings represent 40% of the energy consumption of Europe, 36% of its CO2 emissions, and 75% of these buildings, of the building stock in Europe, is inefficient. For every 1% extra energy saving by 2030, the gas importation for Europe will fall by 4%. The GHG emissions decrease by 0.7%, and the employment will increase by 336,000 jobs. So renovation and the renovation wave is a win-win situation for the climate, for employment, for the economy, and also for the homeowners and the building owners who are using their buildings on a daily basis. Last slide, please. So here I am inviting you to read a study we sponsored with Politecnico di Milano, and that shows that deep and high quality renovation make it possible to reduce energy consumption in our buildings by up to 80%, and as a result reduces the energy bills. But that's not all. Increasing the thermal insulation of walls and roofs considerably lengthens the time interval when the temperature inside a building remains comfortable after the heating has been switched off. The study conducted by the End User Efficiency Research Group, EERJ, of the Politecnico di Milano shows that heating for just one day to the upper end of the comfort zone is enough to maintain a comfortable temperature for a period of up to 3 or 4 days. This means that well-insulated buildings offer the necessary flexibility to receive energy when it is available, attenuating the peaks in power demand on the electricity grid when all inefficient buildings demand power, and properly exploiting moments of overabundance and scarcity of the supply of energy from renewable sources. This work by Politecnico di Milano uses highly significant data to highlight the principle of energy efficiency first. It justifies also the rational strategies in which the reduction of the energy needs for heating from buildings is an indispensable prerequisite for a rapid transition to source of renewable energies and the urgent decarbonization of urban energy infrastructures. At the heart of everything, it is a commitment to the energy efficiency and sustainability of buildings, and the research is really an interesting piece of work that provides expert insights to support the political, industrial, and academic players involved in the energy transition process and the transformation of the buildings. That's it from my side. The last slide is more for your information. If you want to know about more Knauf Insulation or sustainability or insulation products, you can connect to the links you see in the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Yosr. Next up is Christian Deilmann. He's the co-founder and chief product officer at Tado. Christian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Paul, for the kind introduction. We can exactly start with this slide here. And at Tado, it's all about bringing heating and air conditioning systems to the internet, feeding them with data in order to improve energy and efficiency, and in order to make them an integral part of the future smart grid. On the next slide, I took 2 quotes from a research report, which has been performed by the EU Commission in 2019. And one quote is here that heating and cooling in buildings and industry accounts for 50% of the EU and UK's annual energy consumption. So about half, 50%, an important figure. And the second quote, which I chose from this report, in EU households, heating and hot water accounts for 79% of final energy use. And due to these 2 figures, we strongly believe that the heating and air conditioning sector is a really important one for the Green Deal. And how we at Tado envision innovation in this space is what we see here. So today there are about 220 million homes across Europe which have a heating air conditioning systems, and these systems often sit in the basement since 10, 20, 30 years, and they're really ancient technology. And we believe they should be all intelligent, they should be connected, and they should use data technologies like geofencing technology, open window detection, integration of weather forecast. They should be model predictively controlled. And last but not least, they should be integrated into the energy grid. And so this all leads to energy efficiency. On the next slide, we show kind of the energy efficiency across our households, our customers here at tado. By now we have installed, we manage over 1 million of these smart thermostats and respective heating air conditioning systems. And on a monthly basis, we monitor the energy savings of our different homes. Actually, what you can see here is that the efficiency varies depending on what kind of building it's installed in, but it also varies on what kind of people are using it, what are the certain habits, etc. But what this graph here shows is that the average household using such kind of our intelligent control technology saves 22% on average on their annual heating consumption. On the next slide, this is basically the message that when we think about the Green Deal, when we think about investing €1, we really should think into how this euro can be invested in the most wise way. So where do we get the most amount of efficiency from €1 investment? Of course, I mean, there are multiple sources, but I think what's clear is that on one hand, all of these measures are very important. So insulation is really important. New heating systems are really important. And also intelligent control is really important. It actually has a very low amortization time. So you get a lot of efficiency per euro spent. These connected heating air conditioning systems on the next slide are not only there to improve efficiency, but it's also important for the future energy grid. So in the future energy grid, which will be decentral and where intermittent energy sources like wind and solar will play an important role, the demand of energy, so the energy consumption, needs to be flexible, and it needs to react on times when the wind blows and when the sun shines. And since the heating AC sector is such a big consumer and has such big capacity in the European market, and it's steadily also being further electrified, it plays an important role and has a huge potential for flexibility into the energy grid. So what is the tado way? The tado way, so what is unique about tado is that we're the only solution out there which has a cross-manufacturer platform. So basically, that the tado system can connect any kind of heating and air conditioning system. So in Europe and UK, out there in these 220 million homes, there are thousands and thousands of different systems installed from over 900 manufacturers. And what's unique about tado is tado is compatible with all these different systems. So 95% of homes across Europe can make use of a tado. And on the next slide, where do we stand now? Well, what is our impact so far? So by now, we have managed over 1 million smart thermostats and heating air conditioning systems. All of our customers actually together since 2013 have saved over 466,000 tons of CO2. This is actually equivalent to about 1 million passenger flights from Munich to New York City. And in total, tado currently has over 4 gigawatt of capacity under real-time management under the cloud. Coming to the next slide, I basically wanted to say that we're still yet at the very early beginning. So to really have an impact onto the CO2 reduction across Europe, across the UK, and across the world, as a whole industry, we have to bring innovation into all buildings out there. And this is the mission we're on. So thank you very much for the time and listening.
Thank you, Chris. Our next speaker is Jean-Baptiste Cornefert of Sonnen. Over to you, Jean-Baptiste.
Thanks a lot, Paul. If we go on the next slide, you will see our vision at Sonnen, which is to provide clean and affordable energy for everyone. And on the next slide, it's what is my aim for today. It's to talk about the new energy landscape, what we're doing at Sonnen, and how it relates to the smart heating world. So a few words about me on the next slide. So I am currently a CIO and MD of Sonnen since 4 years, and I spent the last 13 years before working for E.ON, a big German utility, where I finally led their demand response and renewable marketing division. So what is Sonnen, so that you get a good understanding of what we are doing? On the next slide, please. So Sonnen is a leading provider of residential storage. And we are not only manufacturing residential storage, we also provide a full package to our customer. This is why we call ourselves the utility of the future. So Sonnen is in the meantime not so small. We have between 700 and 800 employees and 3 manufacturing facilities. One where the headquarters is in beautiful Bavaria, but also in Atlanta in the US and in Adelaide in Australia. So first, talking on the next slide, please, about the trends. Yeah, and I think this was briefly touched upon by Christian in the previous presentation. I will sum it up with a widely huge 3D. The future of the energy system is going to be decentral, decarbonized, and digital. And it's, of course, interconnected. This is possible to get to be decarbonized because we have digital, which support decentralization. So on the next slide, we see the comparison between, let's say, the old energy system, a big coal or nuclear power plant, depending where you're in Germany or in France, and a consumer at the end who is having a plug and doesn't really know where the energy is coming from. On the right side, you see the new energy landscape, which is decentral, interconnected, and in the middle is a consumer, which we called a prosumer at the end, because he has some option either to produce some of the energy he needs or to steer the way he consumes energy. So let's look on the next slide on what we are proposing at Sonnen for our consumer or prosumer. And so we target the home ecosystem, meaning our consumers, they have either usually they have a PV on their roof, a battery on the garage or cellar, and usually a lot of them in new houses and have a heat pump or any kind of steerable heating device. And what we're saying is we provide those prosumers with a full package, meaning if you have a PV on your roof, you will be 30% independent. If you have a PV on your roof coupled with a battery, you will cover approximately 70% of your electricity needs. And at Sonnen, we provide with a full package. We say, well, we provide you with the remaining 30%, so you're 100% independent from a traditional energy retailer. And we do that at no cost. And we do that how? We do that because we will use your battery to provide electricity services or flexibility services. If we can go on the next slide. So we are aggregating, it's called a virtual power plant, thousands and thousands of electric batteries. And we are gathering the flexibility of these batteries, sell that either on the energy market or to the transmission or distribution system operator. It can be TenneT in Germany, it can be National Grid in the UK, to help them stabilizing the grid and supporting the energy transition. Because one of the first hurdle of was a, well, there is not enough renewable. So it's not the case today. Everybody knows there could be enough renewable. The second hurdle would be, well, but you know, these renewables, they are not really stable, and the stochastic feed-in, and so it's not sufficient. And what we've done, what we've proven at Sonnen, is you can provide flexibility, you can stabilize the grid, as well as with a bigger nuclear or coal power plant with thousands and thousands of small batteries spread across the country. And we do that in Germany, of course, but also in Italy and in Australia. And in some countries, we don't do the full package, but we're partnering with utilities, like in the UK with OVO or Centrica, or in the US with Rocky Mountain Power, where we have our flagship product. We're building a new city, carbon neutral, with in Utah with the local energy provider. Yeah. So this is what we're doing at Sonnen. And if we go on the next slide, just to highlight you, and let's have a look at the graph on the left side, and you will see that the potential of solar PV and battery, if you add the blue and the red part, it's approximately 7 million devices that could be part of such a virtual pool. But the smart heating sector, which can be summed up by the orange and yellow part, it would be 23 million devices. So the potential is 3 times as big. And globally, you can add all the air conditioning. You can think about where they are located massively. So my purpose, and then we can go on the next and last slide. This potential is huge in the smart heating sector, and it's growing at a fast pace. Yeah, so of course it depends on the maturity of the market, but it's possible today to support and foster the energy transition with small electric devices that you can steer, and the potential in the smart heating sector is huge. Thanks. That's about it.
Thank you, Jean-Baptiste. Our final speaker is Jon Stenning, an Associate Director at Cambridge Econometrics, where he leads the environment team. Over to you, John.
Thanks very much, Paul, and thanks for having me. So I'm going to talk briefly about the economic implications of decarbonisation and the Green Deal. Next slide. So a brief sort of visit to the key principles of the Green Deal. The Green Deal is essentially aiming to reduce emissions across Europe and to reduce the demands that the economy is putting upon the environment. And you can see here a list of the kinds of measures that they are considering and attempting to bring into place through the Green Deal. And these actions broadly, I would say, fall into 2 categories. One is investment-led activities. So this is in decarbonising industry, decarbonising power generation, and indeed improving energy efficiency of buildings, and behaviour-led actions and activities, such as improved energy efficiency, the role of regulations, and switching to electrification, for example. And all of these changes or these policies, they will affect the costs that are faced by consumers and indeed by businesses, and of course also the options and technologies available to people to use. Next slide, please. And so the key question then is, how do these impact the economy? Now, first of all, we have investment measures. Now, these investment measures can act as a stimulus, sort of generating jobs in the short term. This is, for example, shovel-ready projects that like to be talked about by politicians, but it can include things like energy efficiency, improving energy efficiency of homes. Indeed, you know, we've seen a lot of policy aimed at that, both at the European level in terms of the renovation wave, and in the UK as well. Of course, now the drilling work start. I hope it's not too noisy in the background. We also have longer term effects. So one of the key longer term effects that we see in the European economy is a shift away from fossil fuels. Now, obviously in Europe, these fossil fuels are primarily imported, and towards low carbon generation of power. So primarily electricity, and of course also hydrogen by different methods. And this leads to what I've described here as an onshoring of economic activity. Essentially, we're reducing the dependence of the European economy on imports, and we're instead shifting to demanding power from domestic sources. So creating jobs domestically within Europe instead of overseas, linked to this extraction activity. There are also, of course, other long-term impacts in terms of the changing the costs faced by individuals, by consumers and by businesses. And these vary, unfortunately, rather widely by sector, by measure, and over time. And I think this over time is quite an important and often kind of overlooked factor. You know, a lot of these technologies, they change the profile of expenditure. So for example, they require higher spending in the short term, but have a longer term trade-off in terms of lower costs over time. So an example again being energy efficiency in homes, where we're asking people to invest in heat pumps or invest in improving energy efficiency, but hopefully with the long-term aim of then reducing their energy bills. Next slide, please. So those are some of the economic channels. Now, when we look at this kind of from a macroeconomic perspective, what we see is actually the impacts themselves are really quite small at a kind of net level. So I'm not going to go too much here into the detail of what's in this table, but you can see these impacts on GDP of a 55% reduction in emissions, i.e. what's in the Green Deal in 2030. And what we see here is that depending upon the model you choose and the scenario you choose, you know, impacts which are less than a 1% impact on GDP either way in 2030. But these net impacts, they obviously do hide some of the detail, right? So there will be winners and losers, and there are indeed, you know, large reorganizations within sectors. So the power sector is perhaps the most obvious one that we've seen already, where a shift away from, and a continued shift away from fossil fuel generation and towards renewables has impact on local communities, you know, and on coal regions, for example. And the decentralized nature of power generation has led to a sort of the different economic geography of these industries over time. And inevitably, there will be jobs lost in existing high carbon industries like coal regions, as well as new jobs created in new sectors and new activities. And some of the other things that affect the impacts that we see are, as we said, the specific policy measures, which you see here in the kind of the min and max variants. A little bit about, without wanting to get too sort of technical, about your view of the future of the European economy. So essentially, do we foresee there being spare resources in the economy? That's the fundamental difference between the two models you see here. If you think there's going to be spare capacity in the economy, well, you can create higher employment, you can create new jobs, new economic activity through investment, which is more difficult to do if you believe that all of those resources will be used up. Clearly, in the era of COVID and COVID recovery, there is spare capacity in the European economy, and you know, we can reasonably expect some quite strong stimulus effects in the near future. And finally, it depends upon the extent of action by others. So you see here the fragmented action versus global action, which starts to get this question of what happens if Europe goes first versus if Europe is acting along with global partners to mitigate climate change. Next slide, please. So just to sort of summarize, the Green Deal will create new jobs, but it will also create challenges for existing industries and for incumbent high carbon activities. There will be some stimulus effects from the investment. So, you know, we should be looking to use these and leverage these as part of a green recovery and you know, from COVID in particular. But these upfront investments can improve the long-term prospects for the European economy, can lead to lower costs for households, can lead to more competitive industry, and you know, can have some net GDP benefits and through things like improving energy independence. I'll stop there, thanks.
Thank you, John. And thank you to all of our speakers. We've gone over a little, but we're still going to move on to the Q&A now. And we've had a few questions come in on the Q&A option at the bottom, so keep them coming. We also had many questions during the registration process, but I'll just go to the most upvoted one at the moment on the Q&A. And this is a question for Jan Rosenow, and this was touched upon by John briefly, but what role do you see for hydrogen to replace gas heating, Jan?
Thanks, that's a great question, and of course one that is hotly debated and contested in the energy scene. Although having said that, all the independent analyses that have been done on this question point towards, at least in the medium term, towards a scenario that relies heavily on electrification and efficiency in district heating. I haven't seen a single study that was not funded by a vested interest group that comes to the conclusion that hydrogen would be the main technology to provide our heating needs. Having said that, I'm not dogmatic. I think that there might be a role in some instances in what the Commission has called hydrogen valleys in its hydrogen strategy. You may think of centers of industrial production where you already have a substantial amount of hydrogen available. Maybe there is a place for some hydrogen heating, but for the bulk of the building stock, we won't be using hydrogen for two reasons. One is the cost of hydrogen. All the independent studies point towards a significantly higher cost of hydrogen compared to using electrification, i.e. heat pumps and energy efficiency. And the second reason is that the amount of electricity required to make the hydrogen would be very, very large indeed. And we would have to build out the electricity system to an extent that very few people think is realistic. And it's going to be a lot more difficult and costly than the alternatives. So that's why I think there is a limited role for hydrogen, but I'm not saying that there might be a role. There might not be a role for hydrogen somewhere in this transition, but certainly not in the next sort of 10 to 15 years. Even companies like Centrica, the oldest public gas utility in the world, British Gas in the UK, they have said that they don't think there will be any hydrogen available in the next decade at all. So I think we just have to take them by their word and not build a strategy around a technology that simply does not exist. Less than 5% of all hydrogen today is from renewable sources or is fitted with CCS and is low carbon. So I'm very cautious about the use of hydrogen for that reason, also taking into account all the needs in the other sectors, industry and possibly shipping and aviation.
Thanks, Jan. Very interesting. Actually, a question just came in from Sarah Williams. This will be for Thomas Nowak. Are there any plug-and-play solutions to replace gas boilers and radiators with heat pumps to reduce costs? Any thoughts on that, Thomas?
Yes, it's actually a very interesting segment of the market, and a number of manufacturers are now offering that. I think the biggest, the fanciest way of looking at the whole development is big data in heat pumps. What I would expect to see, and that could be in conjunction with more deployment of these tado devices, but I know that also Knauf Energy Solutions is offering something similar. So if we have better data, then we could build on that one and have an auto-calibrating, auto-configurating heat pump that can then simply be put into an existing building. And yes, there are solutions available if you look for them. If not, if you can't find them, I can point you in the right direction. They are here today.
Thank you, Thomas. Question for Christian Deilmann. What can the EU do to support smart thermostats, especially under the Green Deal?
Yeah, I mean, good question. I mean, essentially, very easy regulation and I think also subsidy schemes is a great way to go here. I mean, there has been, or there is a EU directive, the EIP directive, and a few local laws and subsidy schemes came out of it, especially last year. So for example, the UK new boiler build, but also in France, the coupe de pouce and so on. So I think it's more of these initiatives which helps customers guiding their way, and also the installers and the industries to adapt such new technology. I mean, it's a fairly new technology, so therefore I think it needs some support in order to achieve a large-scale rollout in a faster amount of time.
Thanks, Chris. A question from Frank Everett. I missed cooling of buildings in the presentation. With global heating, the subject's more and more important. I could ask this for many people. I think I'll ask this for Yosr. Yosr, in regards to insulation, does it make a difference if we talk about heating or cooling, or is it essentially the same thing, whether we talk about either or?
It depends on the technology that you are insulating with, but there are some insulation technologies that allow you to have both winter and summer comfort. And yeah, definitely cooling is an energy drain that we need to tackle with better design of the buildings, but also insulation that allows a better thermal dephasing. Mineral wool is part of these solutions, but not only. There are other solutions that can offer that. But insulation will help reducing that energy drain, whether it's for cooling or for heating. And that's why I think everyone agrees around the table. It's very important to get the foundation right first, and then start implementing the system that will make it even better.
Thanks, Yosr. Question for Jean-Baptiste from Jason Orm. Given the desire to combine heat pumps with PV and therefore batteries, the current problem is essentially there's no package solution. The homeowner has to act as a middleman between heat pump installer, PV installer, so on. So can we make renewable installation a bit more straightforward for homeowners? What do you think, Jean-Baptiste?
I think that's really a key issue. And this is a crux, and we need to solve it if we want to have mass adoption. Yeah? And this is also why at Sonnen we evolved from just providing, we had the best battery for instance storage, but it was too complicated. And if you add the interaction with the energy system, where you need to talk with the hardware manufacturer, with the metering provider, with the energy provider, and the guy installing this at your place, and maybe you have an electric vehicle and then you have a heat pump, either you do that full time and you have a PhD in electronics, or it doesn't work. And everybody likes the idea of supporting the energy transition, but I think the crux for mass adoption would be solution provider that would propose package solution, and there are options. The fact that I'm here today also discussing with Tado and listening is that the industry is considering such partnership. We do also, for example, provide in Italy, where it's regulatory compulsory if you want to benefit from tax exemption. We're partnering with an heat pump manufacturer to do that, and we're not the only one. So I think this would be critical for the success, that we need to make it easy for the end customer.
Thank you. I've noticed we've hit 4 o'clock, but we will go on for another 5 minutes or so for those who can still stay. This is a question on policy, so this will be for Jean Rosenow as well. Given that Brexit has happened, is the UK beholden to the wider Green Deal plans and proposal, or is the UK going its own way? How in line in terms of regulation and strategy and plans is the UK with the EU now that it's gone its own way, Jan?
No, of course the UK is not subject to the rules of the Green Deal. That's clear. But I think the UK government and the European Commission and other member states are watching each other very closely on this very important matter. And when you compare the policies, they're not so dissimilar. The UK's 10-point plan that came out in November has some very similar goals that are close to what the Green Deal is doing. The UK has a net zero goal, so does Europe. So I think we're going to see similar developments in the UK and in Europe. And indeed, I mean, I live in the UK, but I was born in Germany. I think the two countries and other countries in Europe will always innovate and learn from each other. I don't think Brexit is going to put a stop to that in any way. So I don't think that's going to happen. I think we'll see more convergence, if anything, when it comes to clean energy technologies over the coming years. So I feel optimistic about it. I don't think they're going to be less cooperation on energy matters in that way.
Good to hear. The question that came up actually when you were giving your last answer, Jean-Baptiste from Lorcan Lyons, what trends do you see in EV charging? Is it important to scenarios that they be charged at home rather than elsewhere? And would this reduce battery life? Jean-Baptiste? Yes.
So I think charging at home is, for me, a convenience. It's easy. Yeah. So everybody's thinking, okay, how can I drive from Munich to Berlin, will that be sufficient? But yes, this happens from time to time. But the reality is that most of the charging happen at home, and it needs to be an integrated solution. It's related to the question whether it affects the battery life. If you do that in a non-smart manner, yes, it could. If you do that properly with the right battery technology, and there are battery technology like lithium iron phosphate that are, let's say, valid for thousands and dozens of thousands of battery cycles. So then that's not a problem anymore. Yeah. So you need to do that smartly with the right technology.
Thank you. A question that came in during the registration, this will be for Jon Stenning. What are the implications if Europe acts more rapidly to reduce emissions than the rest of the world? Interesting question. What do you think about that, Jon?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, so there's sort of a few different schools of thought on this, I guess. I would start with, well, how likely is this? We're already seeing situations where low carbon technologies are becoming cost competitive, or indeed, are more than cost competitive with the existing technologies. We've seen it in the power sector with solar, and we're seeing it now with offshore wind in certain locations, and with onshore wind. We're clearly on a path towards that with EVs. EVs becoming cheaper than internal combustion. So first of all, I'd say I think a shift to low carbon technologies and low carbon methods is almost inevitable in a lot of areas, a lot of sectors. But to take the question at face value, well, if we see global coordinated action, what you see is these costs of these technologies obviously come down more quickly. So the costs of heat pumps will come down more rapidly from sort of learning by doing effects and economies of scale if the whole world is deploying these rather than if Europe is doing it alone. But the same sort of price dynamics are still going to take place. It's just a question of how quickly they come. And of course, if Europe went first, well, in some senses, that's an opportunity, right, for Europe to develop a highly competitive and low carbon economy that's sort of geared for the future that the other parts of the world might be sort of putting off, but they can't avoid forever. I mean, thankfully, it looks like the world is going the opposite direction. And actually, climate action globally is accelerating. Obviously, we've got a new US administration that is doing more. The Chinese are sort of solidifying their net zero plans. So, thankfully, it doesn't look likely. But I think even if it did come to pass, it should be seen as an opportunity to some extent.
Okay, thank you. Question from Neil Merritt. I think what he's trying to say here is the cost of retrofitting can be significant. Is retrofitting these homes to make it more energy efficient going to price out lower income homes and lower income households? I think I'll direct this to Christian Deilmann. I mean, can we make homes more energy efficient without breaking the bank, especially for lower income households?
I mean, maybe here also in regard to cooling and ventilation, maybe Matthias, if you're still on the line, maybe that's a good question for you to answer. Sorry for redirecting.
That's fine. Well, if you look to the total costs of a building and then thinking if you install like a decentralized ventilation device, this can be done for 1,000 euros per room. This is not like blowing the costs of your construction. So I don't see a competition here between affordability for low-income homes and low-income households and affordability.
Okay, thank you. Another question, I'll just a couple more questions before we wrap it up. Question that came in during the registration for Thomas Nowak. Question about data and performance. Could a better use of data help the heat pump industry grow faster? Thomas.
Let me answer personally. I think yes. I'm a bit of a geek actually. I have been building some Raspberry Pi small controllers and Arduino boards to bring in some data. It's not so easy actually. And the point is that we have heard that from Jean-Baptiste that everybody would like to have that, but it's not easily available. And Christian can probably tell you much more about that. how difficult that is to bring the different components together. I would say if we would have standardized sensors that can connect to the heat pump, we have a standardized interface to a weather service that can make the heat pumps useful for demand side flexibility. And then we have this, what I said before, auto-configuring device that helps a bit and alleviates the burden on the installer side. That would result in more trustworthy devices that can also be put into more critical situations that we see today, maybe not fit for heat pump deployment directly. And this is really often a lack of information that we need to overcome, and sensors and also big data evaluation could help there a lot.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I think it's about us as an industry to collaborate stronger to essentially make it easier for customers, for homeowners, building owners, etc., to have a really well-working system altogether. So I think that's also something up on us to create these solutions together.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to ask a quick question for everyone now, just to wrap this up. The question is, do you think the Green Deal is achievable, reaching carbon neutrality? And just what would you summarize in 10 seconds how we can achieve it? What do we need to focus on? So I'll start with Matthias Kersken. What's your thoughts on this?
Well, I think it has to be achievable. I think we don't have another possibility than succeeding here. The way we are going to take there might be might be a lot of bends, and we don't see the entire way now. We always have to drive on site a little, reacting on what we can see, what technologies come up, but I don't see a reason why we could not achieve a Green Deal in terms of getting carbon neutral. Technology is there. Mostly the costs are still a problem, but especially in the moment when the cost of fossil fuels go up, many points we discuss here will dissolve instantly, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Same question for you, Yosr. Is the Green Deal achievable, and what do we need to focus on to make it happen?
It's definitely achievable. If you take a family home that is more than 40 years old, that is poorly insulated under Central European conditions, you save some 11 tons of CO2 per year just by giving the right insulation and the high energy efficiency standards that are available today in the market. So is it achievable? Yes, the technologies are there. Finance is still a challenge, and that's why the conditions to make it achievable is to have a hassle-free funding for innovation. I think Jean-Baptiste also insisted on that. It's very important that it's made simple for the homeowners. More complexity means a barrier, at least a psychological obstacle to go for innovation. So hassle-free funding for innovation, solving also the trust problems by real energy performance, and big data can help on that. And also what needs to happen on member states and at the European level is that there is a dedicated support for social housing, schools and hospitals renovation. That's where people spend the most of their times actually, and it's important that they are renovated as much as the single family owned homes. And maybe one quick win is phasing out the worst performing buildings, starting with sales and rentals. It's simple. You can just put a kind of regulation, which is in discussion now in France, for example, that whenever you want to sell a house or whenever you want to rent a house, you need to perform energy saving measures before putting it on the market again. I think these kind of measures would remove the barriers and will help also revising the European state aid rules for renovations in general.
Thank you. Christian, any final thoughts on the Green Deal and how achievable it is in the time frame we have?
I mean, I'm a positive person. I fully believe that it is possible that we will achieve it. We will become carbon neutral. And I think it's a collaborative act. It's a mix of different technologies in order to come to this goal. And maybe one concrete action, we can also think about putting some more tax on fossil fuels to speed up the transition here.
Thank you, Chris. Jon Stenning, final thoughts. How do you think we could achieve the Green Deal? Or is it achievable? And what do you think are the key things to do this?
Yes, I think it is achievable, and we should be trying to leverage existing technologies. You know, as others have said, those technologies already exist, and I think what we need is the right role for public policy, right, to create correctly aligned incentives, to create the right regulatory frameworks, and fundamentally to reduce uncertainty going forwards. So not necessarily creating markets, but certainly sort of facilitating them and providing these frameworks to give more certainty to investors.
Thank you, Jon. Thomas Nowak, the European Union and the UK has a very ambitious goal to increase the uptake in heat pumps. Do you think this is going to happen, and what do we need to do to make it happen?
Absolutely. I think it's going to happen. We can make it happen. The problem is a soft problem. We have all the technologies available. We basically have all the competence to do it. And now we need to change the market framework in the direction of activating end consumers. And we are big fans of a CO2 price. We have heard it. Fossil fuel needs to become more expensive. Of course, we have to rebalance that also when it comes to poorer households, so that they don't come into this discussion of heat or eat. That was very infamous in the United Kingdom, but I think that can be solved by making energy policy for energy matters and social policy for social matters. And if we do this together, then we will have a great future. And that's what I think is most important. This future is more attractive than what we have today. Nobody wants to live in a UK-style leaky building, right? And the future will be better.
Thank you, Thomas. Nice and optimistic. And for Jean-Baptiste, your thoughts on the Green Deal. Is it achievable, and what do we need to focus on?
Of course, it's achievable, and I'm convinced we will make it even before the announced date. Well, we need to focus on the customer. I think it was addressed a couple of times. We need to make it easy for him. And I mean, the crazy thing is that the technology is available today. I mean, it was said numerous times. I mean, Christian and Tado can steer all possible heating devices. We're providing at Sonnen flexibility services at the highest possible grade with batteries. So I think we need to make it easier. The technology is here today. We need the corresponding, and this was also addressed, we need the corresponding policies, because currently this is where I would see, let's say, where it needs to improve, because companies will develop those services. We need support from the regulatory bodies to make it easier. And the European Union has some good ideas. Some member states are very slow in implementing those measures for strange reason. So this will be my focus. Make it easier for the customer and improve policies.
Thank you. Final question for Jan Rosenow. You've heard from all the speakers here. Everyone thinks it's possible and the technology is already here. It seems that the Green Deal's here. It seems like it's going to happen. Is it easy? Are there any challenges, Jan? Or do you think this is going to happen for sure? Or what do we need to overcome? Why can't we make it happen faster?
Had you asked me a decade ago, I would probably have said it's going to be really difficult and I'm not sure we can achieve it. But I think looking back at the last 10 years and what we've seen in certain sectors of the economy, you know, what we've seen with renewables, offshore wind, solar, what we've seen with electric vehicles, the new technologies, big data, I think that, you know, I'm more and more optimistic that it can be done. What we need is a clear policy signal where we're going to get. I think we need to sort out the pricing. You know, fossil fuels are still too cheap. We need to sort out the regulatory framework. If we get that right, I think, you know, human creativity and innovation can get us there. As I think has been said before, the technology exists already today.
Great. Thank you, Jan, and thank you for all of our speakers. We've run over a bit. I apologize, or thank you for those who stuck around. That's all we have time for. You can contact us at press@tado.com if you have any further questions. We'll also be sending out a press release shortly on this topic. So thank you all for attending. Thank you to our speakers. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Goodbye.